Wake up! It's the Saturday Morning Podcast. Let mom and dad sleep in and come back with me to the 80s. Let's grab a bowl of Golden Puffs or Apple Cinnamon Cheerios and flip on the tube. I've got the TV guide and hours of nothing to do. My name is Chris, and I love all the Saturday morning cartoons. When I was a kid, I lived for Saturday mornings. Now that I'm an adult, I want to relive all those great shows and see where they came from. Let's take a deep dive back to the 80s and see what's waiting. Rewind! Before we start the show, I wanted to take a moment to remember a Saturday morning contributor we recently lost. It seems only too appropriate to look back on the life and career of Joe Ruby as this episode delves into a pup named Scooby-Doo. The legendary Great Dane was, after all, co-created by Ruby. So sit back and maybe take a minute to reflect on the life of Joe Ruby. And if you're a fan of Scooby and the gang, maybe whisper a brief thank you in honor of the man who helped to bring them to life. Joseph Clemens Ruby was born in the early days of the Great Depression on March 30th, 1933 in Los Angeles, California. He was born to Carl, a neurosurgeon, and Mildred, a homemaker. He attended Fairfax High School, graduating in 1950. Upon graduation, Ruby enlisted in the Navy and served during the Korean War. He was a sonar operator on a destroyer. Having an interest in animation and drawing, Ruby was hired at Disney Studios as an in-betweener. For those not in the know, an in-betweener is the person who paints the individual cells that make up the moving images in animation. Ruby knew that becoming an animator was a long process. He started at Disney to get the experience he needed. During the Disney years, Ruby would pursue his drawing passion by becoming a freelance comic book artist and writer. In 1957, Ruby married Carol and had 4 children. After being married for a year, Ruby's father gave the couple $50 as an anniversary gift. Mr. Ruby also told his son he didn't believe he could make it as an artist. After Ruby left Disney, he worked in live-action production for a short time. It was at this time he befriended Ken Spears. The two would, in 1959, start at a small studio that was just starting out themselves, Hanna-Barbera. Ruby and Spears worked as editors on several animated shorts. The partners worked on some of Hanna-Barbera's earliest hits like The Yogi Bear Show, The Flintstones, and The Jetsons. By the mid-1960s, Ruby was no longer content with being an editor and transitioned into writing. He sold a script to Hanna-Barbera for their show, Space Ghost. He'd go on to write an additional 19 shows for Space Ghost. Ruby didn't do it alone, he found a collaborator and fellow editor, Ken Spears. The duo's biggest break came in 1969 when they were tasked to create a show for Saturday morning to fill in a few programming gaps. Action for Children's Television, or ACT, was a group that advocated for less violence in children's cartoon programming. This influence saw to getting 3 of Hanna-Barbera's shows canceled due to violence. Fred Silverman, the executive for daytime programming at CBS, turned to Hanna-Barbera for a show kind of like The Archie Show. Silverman liked that the music from The Archie Show hit the radio and were starting to become hits like Sugar Sugar. If the Archies could do it, couldn't another show? Ruby and Spears set out to create a show about teenagers in a rock band. What came out of that was, say it with me, Mysteries 5. Wait, what was Mysteries 5? Mysteries 5 was the name of a rock band that solved crimes in their spare time. The characters were based in part on the television show The Many Loves of Dobie Gillis. That show featured a good-looking main character that was suave with the girls. There was the beauty queen and the bookish girl, and of course the bongo-playing beatnik. They became the archetypes for the characters of Mysteries 5, Ronnie, Kelly, Linda, WW, and their dog, Too Much. Ruby and Spears had a give and take with the studio, and the show developed in a much different manner. Ronnie was renamed Fred at the behest of Fred Silverman, Kelly became Daphne, Linda became Velma, WW would remain a beatnik, but we know him as Shaggy, which means, of course, that Too Much became the much-loved pup we know today, Scooby-Doo. Scooby-Doo, Where Are You? Hit the air in 1969 and was a hit. From that first episode at the end of the 1960s until today, there have been no less than 13 TV shows, 2 big-screen live-action adventures, and many direct-to-home video stories. While Scooby-Doo was a hit, it was a hit for Hanna-Barbera. As was the fashion of the time, the writers weren't touted or celebrated. They were under contract with Hanna-Barbera to turn in a product, which they did. In the years that followed Scooby-Doo, Where Are You?, Ruby and Spears continued on at Hanna-Barbera. By 1976, they were looking to create content they could control and profit from. And why not? At Hanna-Barbera, they had an insider's look at how an animation studio ran. They learned from the most successful Saturday morning studio of that time. Joe and Ken struck out on their own and started Ruby Spears Productions in 1977. The Ruby Spears studio was a joint effort between the two men as well as ABC. When Fred Silverman left CBS to head up programming at ABC, he took Ruby and Spears with him. The two men would supervise production on the Saturday morning programming. Being in charge meant that Ruby was now a producer and an executive. The first title to roll out of the new studio in 1978 was Fang Face. Then came Plastic Man. The 1980s ushered in hits that became classics with the kids at the time. The shows range from the tongue-in-cheek humor of Cat Heathcliff to the swords and sorcery world of Thundarth the Barbarian. The studio didn't play it safe. They took risks by turning pop culture properties like the Rubik's Cube into a show. And don't forget Turbo Teen, the story of a teenager who could turn into a car. Say what you will, but it was full of imagination and stories that couldn't be told in live action. A trend at Ruby Spears seemed to be taking existing properties and turning them into cartoons. If it was a popular television show or film, they turned it into Saturday morning adventures. Happy Days, Mork and Mindy, Punky Brewster, and Police Academy are but a few of the shows Ruby Spears turned out in the 1980s. In 1996, the Ruby Spears Animation Studio closed its doors after 19 years of operation. Their pre-1991 shows were eventually bought by Time Warner, where they are archived side by side with Hanna-Barbera. At the time of the studio closure, Joe Ruby would have been in his early 60s and eager to enjoy retirement. In 1997, he received a credit as character designer on 11 episodes of Johnny Bravo. Ruby's career was filled with sound editing, writing, story pitching, producing, and even music editing. As far as I can tell, his stint on Johnny Bravo was the only time he put his skills as an animator and artist to use. It's a little sad it happened 40 years after he started at Disney. I have to wonder if he was thrilled to be living out the passion that started him in the medium. Despite his father's prophecy, Ruby made it as an artist and assisted in many others doing the same. On August 26, 2020, at the age of 87, Joe Ruby passed away from natural causes at his Westlake Village home in California. He is survived by wife Carol and their 4 children, Cliff, Deanna, Craig, and Debbie. Thanks for listening. Now, on to a pup named Scooby-Doo. In the city of Coolsville, crime happens. Sometimes there are monsters involved. Things go missing, unexplained things happen. While the national exaggerators suggest aliens or mole people, those are usually not the answer to the crime. Enter the Scooby-Doo Detective Agency. When you need a crime solved or suspect a red herring of, well, just about anything, these are the kids you turn to. Let's go on a crime-solving spree with the pint-sized mystery solvers made up of Fred, Daphne, Velma, Shaggy, and of course, a pup named Scooby-Doo.
There's a mystery in town, so call the coolest pup around. Oh, Scooby, a pup named Scooby-Doo. Join Shaggy and the crew, Daphne, Freddy, Velma too, and Scooby, a pup named Scooby-Doo. Scooby, a puppy named Scooby, a puppy named Scooby-Doo.
Scooby-Doo, Scooby-Doo, where are you?
Scooby-Doo.
In the fall of 1988, ABC launched a pup named Scooby-Doo in the 10:30 time slot. It went up against CBS's Garfield and Friends and NBC's Elf Tales. All three shows were new to the 1988 season. While Scooby-Doo and the gang had been around since 1969, we never knew them at this age. Hanna-Barbera reimagined this property as they had the Flintstones. The members of the Scooby-Doo Detective Agency weren't the adults we knew them to be. They were kid crime fighters, each with a specialty, who tackled the monster of the week in Coolsville. Their leader was Freddie Jones. He jumped to the wrong conclusions at the drop of a hat. The tabloids were his fact sheets. Described as having a vivid and runaway imagination, Freddy is quick to say aliens or mole people or zombies or whatever is behind all the weird mysteries in Coolsville. Oh yeah, and his go-to villain is Red Herring, a tough kid from school who is never the actual villain. Except for that one time. Daphne Blake is a pretty little thing who knows it. She comes from rich folk and even has a butler. Daphne is not a believer in the supernatural and is the skeptic of the group. She can take or leave the ghosts. Her passion is for fashion, and that is do or die. She wears pink and is in love with the color. She'll offer her insights into the mystery, often fingering the wrong person as the villain. When it comes to rolling up her sleeves and getting dirty to solve the mystery, Daphne will pass. She hates getting dirty, it is completely improper. Velma Dinkley is something of the brains behind the group. While soft-spoken, she tends to get on the right track to solve a case. While this takes place in the late 80s, Velma sports a portable computer that's capable of pulling up information and matching suspects to solve a crime. She uses the catchphrase Jinkies, a word that conflicts at times with Daphne's butler, Jinkins. She's also got a fan-propelled skateboard big enough for the entire gang to ride. Really, Velma is the most indispensable of the group. What can you say about Shaggy Rogers? He's got shaggy hair, a huge appetite, and is pretty cowardly when it comes to ghosts and all that kind of stuff. When the mystery really gets turned up, Shaggy is usually the first one who tries to run away. Despite this, he is a valued member of the group and has helped to solve the mysteries. He's also the owner of a pup named Scooby-Doo. And Scooby-Doo is like a dog version of Shaggy. He needs a Scooby snack to get his courage up, but he'd rather be sharing a hero sandwich with Shaggy and resting easy as far away from the mystery as possible. There are times when Shaggy and Scoob pretend to be their favorite cartoon superheroes, Commander Cool and Mellow Mutt. Despite his fear of ghosts, Scooby is always there to solve the case. A pup named Scooby-Doo was the 8th animated show to feature the title character. By the time this iteration aired in 1988, Scooby was poised to celebrate his 20th anniversary in 1989. The first half of the 80s were front-loaded with Scooby shows. In 1980, there was both the Richie Rich Scooby-Doo show, followed by Scooby-Doo Classics. 1982 saw the premiere of the Scooby and Scrappy-Doo Puppy Hour. 1983 introduced the new Scooby and Scrappy-Doo show, furthering the adventures of Scrappy-Doo because all Saturday morning kids loved Scrappy-Doo. 1984 brought the new Scooby-Doo Mysteries, and 1985 double-fisted the 13 Ghosts of Scooby-Doo and Scooby's Mystery Funhouse onto ABC. 1986 and 87 were Scooby-less. Hanna-Barbera likely took a look at their properties and wondered what to do next to make it fresh. In 1986, they produced the Flintstone Kids, taking the equally worn Flintstones of the 60s and 70s and putting a fresh spin on it. In this case, they followed the trend of baby fiction, turning the calendar back to when the characters were in elementary school. Say what you will, but it worked for the Muppets. CBS had Muppet Babies and it was winning in the ratings. The Flintstone kids presented the prehistoric tykes to their Saturday morning peers and gave them lives similar to those kids in the mid-80s. If it worked for the Flintstones, why not Scooby? Although with a title like A Pup Named Scooby-Doo, I do feel like the Flintstone kids should retroactively be called A Dino Named Dino. Tom Ruegger was many things at Hanna-Barbera. He was an animator, storyboard artist, lyricist, and writer. He had also been the story editor on the multiple Scooby series since 1982. When asked by ABC executives Amy Simon and Jeannie Trias what could be done with Scooby-Doo, Ruegger had the answer: something different. Like the audiences of the 80s, Ruegger was just as tired of the tried and true Scooby formula. He was looking for something different. He thought of making the mystery solvers as young as the viewing audience. To make sure this Scooby was different, the show went back to a wacky, zany style of animation. More of a Tex Avery vibe than most of the shows that ever came out of Hanna-Barbera. The show was modernized by using music that sounded retro but still modern. After all, movies like Back to the Future were introducing kids of the 80s to the likes of Chuck Berry and Etta James. The colors, too, were brighter than the shadowy noir style of the previous 7 shows. In short, while the Scooby shows had always had funny moments, this show was actually fun. There was the ridiculous conspiracy theories that Freddy tried to make a reality. There was the super huge skateboard that Velma had. The humor was fun for kids and adults. With the idea set, all Ruegger and Hanna-Barbera had to do was find the perfect cast. Part of the casting process must have been pretty easy. 2 of the main actors had been with the Scooby franchise since day one. Don Messick was Scooby-Doo at the very beginning and in all the series that followed. Casting him to play A Pup Named Scooby-Doo was a no-brainer. What would have changed about Scooby? How could they have made him younger? The short answer is they didn't have to change anything about Scooby. And for that matter, they didn't have to change Shaggy either. At the time Pup was in production, Messick was also providing vocals on NBC for another Hanna-Barbera venture. He was Papa Smurf on the long-running series The Smurfs. Casey Kasem, like Messick, was with his character from the beginning. Way back in 1969, Kasem was cast as Shaggy. He had been Shaggy longer than he had been the host of the popular American Top 40 music program that first aired on the 4th of July, 1970. Born Kamal Amen Kasem in 1932 in Detroit, Michigan, Casey was inspired to get into radio in the 1940s while listening to the program Make Believe Ballroom. Kasem would get his first exposure to radio while at Northwestern High School covering sports in Detroit. After high school, Kasem went off to Wayne State University where he got involved in radio. He provided voices for the radio shows The Lone Ranger and Challenge of the Yukon. His radio career was briefly put on hold in 1952 when he was drafted and sent to Korea. But that also gave Kasem the chance to further his career as he was a disc jockey and announcer on the Armed Forces Radio Korea network. Through the 1960s, Kasem would work at several radio stations as a program personality and producer. He had an interest in top 40 hits, which were on the decline in this era. In the late 60s, Kasem would appear as an actor on Hawaii Five-0 and Ironside. He even appeared in several low-budget movies about bikers. In 1968, Kasem was cast in the Batman-Superman Hour for Filmation. He voiced Batman's sidekick Robin and Bruce Wayne's ward, Dick Grayson. The very next year, Kasem moved to Hanna-Barbera and found himself cast in the role of Shaggy on Scooby-Doo, Where Are You? Carl Stevens was 14 years old at the time he was cast as Freddie Jones. He replaced the original voice of Freddy, Frank Welker, to bring a younger sound to the character. Stevens started his career in 1981 at the age of 7 on an episode of Little House on the Prairie. As an actor, he found work on a variety of TV movies and TV shows. On the big screen, he played a 9-year-old Spock in the 1984 movie Star Trek III: The Search for Spock. By the time he won his part on A Pup Named Scooby-Doo, Stevens had played the character of Franklin on several Charlie Brown specials and provided voices for Popeye and Son. Kelly Martin was born in Riverside, California in 1975. She appeared on an episode of Father Murphy starring Merlin Olsen in 1982. The show is created by Michael Landon of Bonanza and Little House on the Prairie fame. Martin's aunt was the nanny for Landon's kids and helped her niece to land an audition. That was enough to start her career. What followed next was a role in the Whoopi Goldberg comedy Jumpin' Jack Flash and the TV show Life with Lucy. Her first gig as a voice artist was as Lolly on the animated short Potato Head Kids, not long before being cast as Daphne. Christina Lang, like Kelly Martin, also appeared in The Potato Head Kids. Her career started in 1984 in the movie Crimes of Passion. She also provided additional voices for the animated Punky Brewster, as well as playing Sister Bear on the Berenstain Bears. Now that the main cast was in place, it would take some guest actors to really bring A Pup Named Scooby-Doo to life. Over the run of the show, A Pup Named Scooby-Doo had a variety of guest stars that helped to bring the animated world of Coolsville to life. Isabel Sanford appeared in the very first episode, A Bicycle Built for Boo, as Shirley MacLaine. She is best remembered for her 11-season run on The Jeffersons as Wheezy Jefferson. It's not hard to pick out her raspy voice among the characters. Born Eloise Gwendolyn Sanford in 1917, Isabel was a star of the Broadway stage for over 30 years before moving to Hollywood. Her first role in front of the cameras was in the 1967 film Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, for which she was paid $600 a week. She soon caught the eye of producer Norman Lear, who cast her as Louise Jefferson in All in the Family before she was spun off into her own series. Lear said he had remembered seeing Sanford in the play The Amen Corner. Della Reese, like Casey Kasem, hailed from Detroit, Michigan. She started her singing career at the age of 6 and by her teens was touring with renowned gospel singer Mahalia Jackson. She started acting around the time she was 30 and never stopped. Not long before A Pup Named Scooby-Doo, Reese appeared on an episode of The A-Team. She played B.A. Baracus' mom. Despite her singing career, she will always be best remembered as Tess on Touched by an Angel. By the way, Reese was an ordained minister and officiated the wedding for Angel co-star Roma Downey in 1995. Providing additional voices was veteran actor Earl Bowen. Bowen is one of those character actors who can play just about anything. He's also one of those guys that you see and say, hey, I know him from something. I'm sure the thing most of us know him from is as the police psychologist in The Terminator. He's done everything from action to drama and comedy. While he retired from screen acting in 2003, he continues to lend his vocals to radio, cartoons, and video games. After these messages, we'll be right back with the premiere of A Pup Named Scooby-Doo.
Once upon a time there was a kid who said, I've got a great big bunch of crackers in my bed. But all the crackers crumbled, so into bed he tumbled. Gotta match the crackers in my bed. Feed the kid. Gotta match the crackers in my bed. You wanna match a cracker? Gotta use your head. If you can't, I'll put it back. If you can, you gotta match. Gotta match the crackers in my bed.
Crackers in my bed, new from Parker Brothers.
Watch me trick Fred out of his new Fruity Pebbles with lime green. Good day, mate.
Crocodile Bondi.
If you don't give him green, me crocodile gets mean.
Shut.
He's after your Fruity Pebbles, mate. New Lamalicious Fruity Pebbles.
What? Dino? Pawning my pebbles.
See you later, alligator.
Fruity Pebble cereal, now with lime green. Part of this nutritious breakfast. Yabba dabba delicious.
Don't wake the dragon. It's Parker Brothers' Don't Wake the Dragon game.
Please don't wake the dragon. Let the dragon snore. You can try and take the pain for Hank, but watch out for his
In the Don't Wake the Dragon game, if you rescue your penguin egg and carry it home safely, you win.
You can try and take the penguin egg, but watch out for his roar.
Don't Wake the Dragon from Parker Brothers.
If you watched the premiere of A Pup Named Scooby-Doo, the date was September 10th, 1988. Ronald Reagan was the President of the United States. America was listening to Sweet Child of Mine by Guns N' Roses, the #1 song in the land. Moviegoers excitedly went to the theaters to see Robert De Niro and Charles Grodin in Midnight Run. On the TV guide was K. Lanny Relko with the caption, "Behind those smiles, inside the mind of Miss America." If you were a kid in 1988, maybe you got up early and got yourself breakfast. Maybe you had a new cereal like a bowl of Nintendo System or Dunkin' Donuts. A Pup Named Scooby-Doo starts with old-style doo-wop and a shot of Coolsville with a bunch of monsters running around, but some of them are flying. The police can't contain this. This honestly looks more like a real emergency. Knowing that kids are going to step in and debunk it makes me wonder what the adults were doing. Unless this show is pulling a Saint Elsewhere and concluded with this just being a fantasy in Shaggy's head, these are some serious monsters. At Shaggy's home, Scooby tries to get his kibble, but a monster pops out of his bowl. The dog runs away like a scaredy cat. And then we find the gang in a cemetery, again being chased by monsters. One goes by with obviously human legs. Another grabs Shaggy, and he's got a monster face on his shoes. So this monster has one normal foot, and the other shoe is thicker with a monster face popping out of it. It's also a 3-headed monster, so there's that. Speaking of feet, Shaggy's feet look like they're on fire, and Scooby is trying not to sneeze. But the dog does sneeze, and the ghoul drops Shaggy, jumps sky high, and ends up in an open grave. Now the gang is surrounded by monsters, paralyzed with fear. Daphne feeds Scooby a Scooby snack, and he blasts off into a rocket. I take this as a metaphor that, when the monsters are around, Scooby drops a euphoric snack and bails out on everyone. As in the classic Scooby-Doo, Scooby and Shaggy are being chased by a monster in a hallway, running back and forth, until Velma, on her motorized skateboard, chases the monster back. The Scooby gang line up in front of a haunted house. Velma's on her computer, solving the crime or checking out an AOL message board. And finally, Shaggy and Scooby split a huge bowl of ice cream at the local dessertery. The story, A Bicycle Built for Boo, opens with an homage to Dragnet, introducing the city, Coolsville, USA. I would have liked to have seen Joe Friday and Shaggy Rogers coming face to face. Remember that Dragnet episode with the Blue Boy? Imagine that Shaggy, and that seems about right. You have the right to remain silent for possession of sandwiches. Shaggy tells us he's got a paper route to deliver, so he always wakes up early. The Daily Babbler editor himself, Mr. Conrad, tosses a bundle of papers at the Rogers house. We even see a red bike. Is it built for Boo? Hard to tell in the daylight. Of course, we find Shaggy dead asleep. Scooby fixes the problem by cannonballing his friend, and the two bounce, almost hitting the ceiling. Shaggy tells Scoob to get the papers into his bike. Scooby squeezes through the mail slot, and we see the family house has a Christmas wreath on the front door. If this is September, is that wreath up early, or just not taken down from last year? Although the Christmas lights are also up on the outside of the house. Is it Christmas in September? Or is this just how the Rogers family does things? Scooby's paw goes all Swiss Army knife, and he chooses a blade over a fork, wrench, and corkscrew. Folding the newspapers onto the bike, a green gelatinous monster lends a hand. As it is in cartoons, it takes a second for this to sink into Scooby's brain. But once it does, the adrenaline takes over, eyeballs bug out, and Scooby shakes in his fur, and the monster takes the bike. Now at full fright, Scooby jumps through Shaggy's window and hides under the covers of Shaggy's bed. Why did this dog ever get into solving mysteries? He's not a Scooby-Doo, he's more like a Scooby-Don't. Shaggy uncovers Scooby and finds him sucking his thumb and cuddled up with a teddy bear. Who knew that an emotional support animal needed an emotional support animal? Guess we know who supports the supporters. Shaggy says Scooby looks like he's seen a ghost, and the dog agrees. I always thought ghosts were transparent and all floaty. What Scooby saw looked like a monster. And speaking of that monster ghost, he's got a second head in his mouth and can fit on Shaggy's bike and rides away. 1, that's a slow way to get away. 2, the monster's got cankles and long legs. There's no way he and Shaggy could fit on the same bike. Maybe he adjusted the seat when we weren't looking. Shaggy calls a meeting at the Scooby-Doo Detective Agency up in the treehouse at the top of the tallest tree in Coolsville. Freddy, Daphne, and Velma are all assembled. They're all there to witness Shaggy kicking and screaming on the floor, lamenting his bike. His cherry 1959 Starfire Special bike. Scooby says it was a ghost who took it. Daphne says there are no such things as ghosts, and she's right in this case because it was clearly a monster that took it. This is going to be a constant tug-of-war with this episode, isn't it? Or is the mistake intentional to show us that kids are dumb? Freddy, with zero detective work, has solved the crime. It was done by Red Herring, the neighborhood thief and bully. I mean, this kid Red is tough. He's like 13 and has a tattoo. Fred's got a picture of this guy and everything. It's like poster size up on the wall. Maybe Fred has some kind of dude crush going on here. The gang follows Red Herring into a desert wasteland, though Daphne calls it a swamp. There's no marsh until the story says Daphne steps into pink mud. She hates to get dirty. Must be why she's got a butler. A pink monster with hypnotic googly yellow eyes rises out of the mud to attack the kids, and everyone runs for their lives. Scooby faints, and the gang backs themselves into a corner. And the monster? Well, that's just Red Herring in disguise. Fred accuses Red Herring of the bike crime, and Red laughs in his face. Velma, with her metal detector, leads the way to a bike hidden in the bushes. Aha! They caught him Red Herring-handed. But Red's bike is blue, and the bike Shaggy had that blew away with the ghost monster was red. Clearly not the same bike. Or is it? Freddy needs some sandpaper to sand the paint off. Velma just happens to have a cordless sandblaster, because who doesn't carry a sandblaster wherever they go? Freddy goes to work and all but destroys Red's bike. And it is Red's bike without a drop of red to be found under all the blue paint. All Fred can say for sandblasting the bike is, oops. And then Red runs him over with his oopsie machine. You know what I think? Freddy deserves it. I guess Red Herring was actually a MacGuffin. Wouldn't it be funny if his real name was Redward MacGuffin Herring? Anyways, back at Shaggy's house, Fred has a bike tire prank going up his front. Daphne is dressed as a nurse, Velma as a doctor, and they get Fred on the mend. Turns out that when you destroy a kid's bike, you need to replace it, and that costs the Scooby-Doo Detective Agency all their money. Guess they won't be spending that cash on high-tech gadgets or a complete collection of Garbage Pail Kid cards. Velma says, aha, and then the gang goes wild because this is the first time she's spoken in the show. I'd like to say that Velma then sings Take On Me in a rad music video where she's half cartoon, half human being, channeling the Norwegian band she mentioned. But she doesn't, and that reference is totally bogus. Velma goes to her supercomputer in the briefcase that's too small and too flat to keep this huge machine in. Maybe the briefcase is using TARDIS technology, in which case this all makes sense. Maybe that was why Velma was a doctor a moment ago. The computer gives Velma a clue. She matches a tire track in Shaggy's driveway to the tire print his bike would have made. It's a match, and Scooby can follow the tire track to the missing bike. It's so obvious that even Daphne can figure it out. Scooby tracks, and, when on the right scent, blows a bugle that sounds like the theme that Scrappy-Doo used to sing before shouting, "Puppy power!" I hope that little turd doesn't show up to ruin this show too. Fred, Daphne, and Velma bust out of Shaggy's garage on Velma's super awesome jet-powered skateboard to follow Shag and Scoob. The pup leads the gang straight into the lobby of the Daily Babbler, the local newspaper. You know, the one Shaggy works for. In the process, they knock over the prototype from Miss Cleo, an eccentrically dressed Shirley MacLaine. More on her later. In the printing shop of the newspaper, Shaggy introduces the gang to Mr. Conrad, the editor, printer, and personal checker of all the paper boys. When Shaggy says his bike was stolen, Mr. Conrad is cool about it and doesn't fire Shaggy for not delivering that morning's papers. The customers are going to complain though, I guarantee it. And then Shaggy will get fired, It'll be on his permanent record, and he won't get into the great college he never wanted to get into, and he'll have to sleep in a van down by the river, solving crimes with the other rejects. Oh, I just discovered the origin of all the other Scooby-Doo shows. Anyways, Scooby snoops and sneezes at the printer's ink used in the newspaper. Scooby sneezes himself out a window, he sneezes himself back into the window and straight into the printing press. He goes through the machinery and is crushed to a bloody pulp. The kids witness the horrific death and are never the same again. Oh, wait, nope. Scooby gets printed and folded into a newspaper, and the show can continue. Huh, funny, he was printed on with the same ink that made him sneeze, except now he's not sneezing because... plot convenience. Mr. Conrad kicks the kids out of the paper, and they spin through the revolving door that was popular in the 80s. It spins them right round, baby, right round, like a record baby. Right round, round, round. Back on the case, Scooby picks up the scent of the bike and drags the gang to a haunted house. Not just any haunted house, but the Ferguson place, like the most haunted house in town. How many haunted houses are there in Coolsville? Scooby doesn't go in, so Daphne bribes him with doggy crack. I mean a Scooby snack. I mean snack crack. No. Eating his treat, Scooby forms into a rocket and blasts off, and man, is he high. Because he's a rocket. And then he comes down from that high in a mellow mood, and has the courage to enter into the haunted house. Fred says they all need to stick together, and the best way to do that is to split up. Velma, Shaggy, and Scooby will check the backyard. Fred and Daphne are gonna go off and do something I'll tell you about when you're 18. Opening the cellar door, Scooby unleashes a monster. Not just any monster, but the one that stole the bike. Mystery solved. Except it's not. The monster pops out a second head from its mouth and tells the kids to get out. They slam the monster back into the cellar. Finding Freddy and Daphne, Shaggy reports they found a ghost. What is it with confusing a ghost with a monster? If you can walk through it, it's a ghost. If it tries to stomp on you, it's a monster. I learned that from Tobin's Spirit Guide. Daphne revisits her stance on ghosts, that they don't exist. In this case, she's right. Hey Daph, how do you feel about drooling slime monsters? Because they is real. Who pops out of the spooky forest to help the kids? None other than Shirley MacLaine. And man, is she 80'd up. Sunglasses, huge earrings, big bracelet, and a purple coat. And the jacket's got shoulder pads, big, thick shoulder pads. So thick she could be a news anchor. It really is the 80s. MacLaine goes into a strange trance, tells the kids to get out, and walks away casually. For a second, she also walks like an Egyptian. Walking away, she drops her Kodak 110 camera. Freddy figures out that MacLaine is an alien from Mars who's come to steal bicycles to take over the world. No. Scooby finds the fender of Shaggy's bike and they're back on the trail. And the trail leads to the house they were told to leave. Inside the creepy old house, the gang fall through a broken floor and land in a pile of cash in the basement. It's like a poor version of Scrooge McDuck's vault, but with less head trauma from slamming your noggin into all those metal coins. Like Scrooge McDuck, Scooby swims in the bills, and Shaggy dreams of buying 1,000,000 new bikes. Velma realizes that all the bills have the same serial numbers. Before telling us what that means, Shaggy unleashes the monster ghost and the chase is on. Backed into a fireplace, Velma finds a big red button and presses it. The fireplace spins around to a secret room and straight down a standard cartoon shoot gag. Seriously, there's a huge chute with a sign that says standard cartoon shoot gag. That's awesome. I can't even make fun of that. Well done, showrunners. You podcast-proof your show before podcast. Arriving in the basement's basement, the gang find a subroom lit by torches and a printing press. Stumbling into greatness, Scooby even finds the missing bike. Velma realizes that the chain on the bike is missing. She sees a chain on the printing press and she solves the mystery. And then the monster reappears. Together, the gang split up. Cue the chase music and give me a shot of the kids doing those kooky dances. Yep, there it is. Thanks, 80s. Because it's standard operating procedure, Velma loses her glasses and gets into mischief. Scooby, using a rope, Tarzans her all over that basement and even into the monster before she finds her glasses. Scooby and Velma find ink and the pup almost sneezes, like he did in the newspaper printing room. Callback, y'all. Shaggy, Fred, and Daphne are backed into a corner, and Shaggy foreshadows their future by calling out, "Scooby-Doo, where are you?" Was it a question or an exclamation? We'll never know. Scooby sneezes, bounces off the walls, and knocks the monster into the printing press. The monster is trapped in the press, and Freddy reviews the facts so far to solve the crime. He suggests that Shirley MacLaine is an alien spy, and why he doesn't mention she's also the gunman on the grassy knoll is beyond me. Turns out MacLaine was being held hostage and isn't really a psychic medium. She's an agent of the US Treasury sent to single-handedly take down a counterfeiting ring. Velma solves the case, saying that all the money is fake, the medium is fake, the monster is fake, and, give me a break, is Mr. Conrad. The editor stole Shaggy's bike for the chain to run the broken printing press. I know that Shaggy's bike was vintage and all, but would bike chain technology really change that much in 30 years? Couldn't Conrad have used some other bike chain to stay low profile? I mean, bike stores sell like a dozen different chain lengths. Use some of that funding money to buy your chain and don't blow your cover. Now that the mystery is solved, the gang gorge on ice cream at the local ice creamery. The Scooby-Doo detective agency sticks Shaggy with the bill for their ice cream as the cost of solving the mystery and getting the bike back. Because Scooby is a complete pig, the bill is $25 and $19.88. That's like $54.18 today. That's some big ice cream there, Scooby. So the day is saved thanks to a pup named Scooby-Doo. The end. Oh, and this whole story could never have happened today because there are no newspapers and kids are too lazy to have paper routes. The real end. Of the 27 episodes that ran over the course of 4 seasons, 3 are highly rated and remembered as being among the best. Funny enough, they all came from the first season of the series. Number 3, Snow Place Like Home. The gang goes to the mountains for some skiing, but they find that there's no snow. They do find a mystery brewing when a land developer offers to buy the chalet for next to nothing. And then there's an ice monster. When the Scooby-Doo detective agency find an abandoned gold mine, all the clues point to red herring. But probably not. This episode marked the first time that Shaggy would try a Scooby snack. Number 2. Now museum, now you don't. The police think that Shaggy and Scooby stole 2 valuable samurai swords from a museum. Of course they didn't, but they saw who did. It was the ghost of a villainous samurai. But they'll have to prove it to win their innocence. Either that or make sure all the evidence points to red herring. And no, the language the ghost speaks isn't actually Japanese, it's plain old gibberish. And number 1, the schnook who took my comic book. This fan favorite finds Shaggy and Scooby at a comic book convention. While Shaggy enjoys the time around his own kind, it's not long before his valuable collector's edition of Commander Cool goes missing. To get it back, Shag and Scoob have to assume their superhero identities, Commander Cool and Mellow Mutt. And no, Freddy doesn't think it's red herring, but Shaggy does. This episode marked the first time we saw the monster dancing with the Scooby Gang. And that was the top 3 favorite fan episodes for a pup named Scooby-Doo. After these messages, we'll look at the impact, aftermath, and explore the legacy of a pup named Scooby-Doo.
Ready or not, here they come!
He slimed me!
Today,
Blast him!
the real Ghostbusters!
Did you see the latest Nintendo newsletter?
Whoa, nice graphics. I'd like to get my hands on that game.
You mean you haven't played it yet? We can play it on my Nintendo Entertainment System. It's The Legend of Zelda, and it's really rad. Those creatures from Ganon are pretty bad. Octoroks, Tektites, Levers, too. But with your help, our hero pulls through. Yeah, go Link, yeah, get Zelda.
Awesome.
Intense.
The Nintendo Entertainment System. Your parents help you hook it up. The Legend of Zelda sold separately.
Field trip.
Hey, Ernie, did you remember your permission slip?
Mrs. Bates. Field trip. Field trip.
All right, guys, remember the buddy system.
Alphabetical order.
Seeing stuff. Stuff that's cool. Stuff that's gross. Stuff that's really neat.
Aw, that's so cute.
Wild. Feed me. Oh no. Stuff to eat.
McDonald's!
It's a good time for the great taste
Want a bite? Okay.
of McDonald's.
She's so gorgeous! She's so hot!
Barbie and the Rockers.
Is she great or what?
Poppin' rock, cool shirt and shiny pants. My Minnie is the max, and my stars dance.
Loves her hair.
Barbie,
Oh!
you're my dream.
Oh, Ken! Dance for us, Barbie! Barbie, dance for
Barbie and the Rockers.
Barbie and the Rocker dolls with dancing action. Ken and Derek dolls, each sold separately. New from Mattel.
Was it a phenomenon? That's a good question. At the time it aired, I would have said yes, but looking back on it, I can clearly see it was not. It was a final show to keep the Scooby-Doo brand alive, and it was fun. It took the gang to new places and was fresh and innovative at a time when Hanna-Barbera was still trying to be relevant. Scooby was also on the air to celebrate the 20th anniversary of Scooby-Doo, Where Are You? To me, what Hanna-Barbera, and specifically Tom Ruegger, did brought new life to the crime-fighting canine. They managed to generate a little bit of merchandise. There were a pup named Scooby-Doo puzzles and a lunchbox. So the series that took Saturday morning by storm and left a lasting impression for generations to come? No. After a 4-year span, the show was canceled by ABC. It's interesting to note that the network canceled it to pursue another Hanna-Barbera project, The Pirates of Darkwater. They did not want to pay the animation studio for 2 separate shows. As so often happens on Saturday morning, the network went with something new, pulling the old one. After all, a new show was a new chance to win over the young audience with a whiz-bang show. If it attracted the demographics they were looking for, there would be another cycle of heavy promotion and merchandising opportunities. On Saturday morning, things didn't stick around because the network was sentimental. If it was making money, it stayed. If viewers switched channels, it was quickly pulled at the first sign of waning popularity and replaced with a possible winner. Case in point, the show was placed into a 12:30 p.m. time slot for the final season. Just 1 year before, it was in the prime 8 a.m. time slot, kicking off the Saturday morning block on ABC. What replaced A Pup Named Scooby-Doo was the ABC Weekend Special, a show that floated around as needed to fill space. The show was sort of celebrated. It was twice nominated for Daytime Emmys in the Outstanding Animated Program category, once in 1989 and again in 1990. In 1989, it lost to The New Adventures of Winnie the Pooh. It lost out again in 1990 in a tie between Winnie the Pooh and the animated Beetlejuice. On August 17, 1991, A Pup Named Scooby-Doo aired its last episode. Six years after A Pup Named Scooby-Doo went off the air, Scooby actor Don Messick passed away. Pup was the last series that Messick was a part of, voicing his legendary character. In the years left to him, Messick would voice Scooby 2 more times. Once in the TV movie Scooby-Doo in Arabian Nights and the video game Scooby-Doo Mystery. In his final years, Messick didn't slow down. He continued to provide voices for Hanna-Barbera, returning to other characters he had helped to create. He played Bam Bam Rubble in various Flintstone projects, Hampton in Tiny Toon Adventures, and Dr. Benton Quest in the revival of The Real Adventures of Johnny Quest. Oh yeah, and he played Droopy in several Tom and Jerry related shows. In 1996, Messick quickly retired without explanation. It was later revealed he had suffered a stroke as a result of chronic smoking throughout his life. On October 24, 1997, Messick passed away in Salinas, California at the age of 71. Casey Kasem continued to perform voice work for animated programs. He was with American Top 40, a show he co-created from 1971 until 1988. He would return to AT40 in 1998 and stay with it for another 6 years. In 2005, Kasem hosted American Top 10 and Top 20 with the same countdown format that AT40 had. In 2009, he stepped down and retired from radio work to focus on writing a memoir or possibly explore writing in other capacities. His last American Top episode was on the 39th anniversary of that show. Even in retirement, he didn't stay away from animation for long. He did play Shaggy's dad, Colton Rogers, on the 2010 series Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated. Diagnosed with Parkinson's in 2007, or possibly Lewy body dementia, Kasem's health started to deteriorate. On June 15, 2014, Kasem passed away at the age of 82. He is interred in Oslo, Norway. Carl Stevens, who voiced Freddy, continued to act until 1996. His last small-screen role was on the TV adaptation of Weird Science, playing the character of Matthew. Following a routine tonsillectomy, Stevens became addicted to pain medication. In 1998, he married Dawn, and the two had a son, which they named Noah. The addiction that Stevens had caused him to steal to support his habit. In 2010, he was caught robbing a CVS at gunpoint and sentenced to 13 years in prison. Sadly, he died of a heroin overdose while serving his time in Tucson, Arizona. He was 36 years old. Kelly Martin, the voice of Daphne, is an author, mother, and still an actress. Perhaps her best-known role was on the 1989 series Life Goes On as Becca Thatcher. Or maybe you remember her as the title character from Christie, or from her stint on ER. No matter where you remember her from, I bet that you do remember her. Martin returned to school at Yale University and graduated in 2001 with an art degree. Most recently, she became the star of Haley Dean Mysteries for Hallmark, a series of TV movies that seems to appear with regularity. She also owns and operates her own toy store, rompstore.com. Christina Lang, the voice of Velma, received her last credit in 1991 for the animated series Peter Pan and the Pirates. Lang played Wendy Darling and it ran for 63 episodes. And then her professional trail ends. I can find several obituaries for various people by this name, but I can't find any mention of any of them being this voice actor. If anyone out there has any information about Christina Lang, please let us know. Tom Ruegger, creator of the show, left A Pup Named Scooby-Doo after the first season. In 1989, he was lured by Gene McCurdy to come to Warner Brothers to reopen the defunct Warner Animation department. McCurdy's partner in this project was director Steven Spielberg. It was an offer that Ruegger couldn't refuse. Having been a fan of zany cartoons, even writing that element into A Pup Named Scooby-Doo, he sought to continue that element in his Warner Brothers work. He would go on to create Tiny Toon Adventures and followed that up with Animaniacs and the spin-off Pinky and the Brain. In more recent years, Ruegger partnered with Disney Jr. to create the show The 7D. Animaniacs is poised to make a comeback in the near future. It's unclear if Ruegger will be on board as a producer or have any involvement. What is the legacy of A Pup Named Scooby-Doo? It was the last Scooby series of the 20th century. When Pup ended, Scooby fans would have to wait until 2002 for new television adventures with their favorite Great Dane. In the interim, there would be Scooby content in the form of direct-to-video shows, a few specials, and a few video games. 2002 saw the return to Scooby Madness. What's New Scooby-Doo aired on the WB, and for the first time, there was a live-action Scooby movie that hit theaters in June. It made $275 million worldwide, well enough to get a sequel 2 years later. Currently, there have been 13 series centering around Scooby-Doo since 1969. The latest, Scooby-Doo and Guess Who, features the Mystery Mutt teaming up with fictional characters like Sherlock Holmes and Steve Urkel to solve the mystery of the week. As far as a pup named Scooby-Doo is concerned, the latest entry to the Scooby mythos is the 2020 feature Scoob. This is a movie that will act as a start to the Hanna-Barbera cinematic universe and dabbled in many of the classic HB characters outside of Scooby and Friends. It featured the voice talents of Will Forte, Mark Wahlberg, Zac Efron, and Jason Isaacs. Pup's influence can be felt in the first few minutes where we find Shaggy and Scooby getting together at Venice Beach back in the day. Scooby is a pup, Shaggy is a young man. The story gets into a haunted house, teaming a boy and his dog with Fred, Daphne, and Velma. While the film then recreates the opening credits of Scooby-Doo Where Are You? To show the passage of time, I'd like to think that the opening is an homage to Pup. Perhaps it's an effort to reconcile all the Scooby adventures into chronological order. Maybe it's just a way to add weight to the relationships between the characters for story purposes. Whatever the case, it was a nice throwback. Who knows, as the Hanna-Barbera cinematic universe expands, maybe they'll include a feature based on Pup. And if so, I hope it answers that one burning question that's never been answered. Whatever happened to Red Herring? Until next time, thanks for tuning in. If you go to patreon.com/SaturdayMorn, you'll find a page where you can help to support the Saturday Morning Podcast. There's a $5 level for general support and a $10 level that unlocks some goodies. At $10 a month, you get entered into a drawing to win a signed production script of an episode, bonus content, a membership card, email priority for all Saturday morning memories and general comments, and a monthly shout out in an episode. As long as you keep supporting us, we'll keep recognizing you. This month, we recognize Scott Gunstream, our first patron. Scott, thanks so much for helping to make these episodes possible. Until next time, thanks for tuning in. Thank you for joining us at the Saturday Morning Podcast. If you like what you hear, please subscribe and leave a 5-star review wherever you get your episodes. If you'd like to drop us a line, please write to satmornpod@hotmail.com. You can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at satmornpod. If you'd like to support us to create more of these things, find us at patreon.com/SaturdayMorn. Supporters will get extra content and a chance to win behind-the-scenes prizes and given email priority. Do you have any vintage Saturday morning memories? Email your story and we can read it on the next episode.